Vertigo,
Zodiac,
poetic,
Journey.
Inventory.
references, symbolic,
Uninterrupted.
poetic, visionary,
Hello, my dear fashion lovers. I'm truly delighted to welcome you back today for what feels like one of the most anticipated couture moments of the season. We're heading to Paris to experience Alessandro Meekehleh's very first Haute Couture chapter for Valentino. And from the very first seconds, it becomes clear that this is not simply the arrival of a new creative director. We're entering a complete universe, dense, theatrical, almost dizzying, where every detail seems to converse with centuries of history, while searching for something deeply contemporary. The title of the collection says a lot, Vertigineux, a word that perfectly captures the sensation of abundance, visual richness, and constant movement running through the show. Alessandro Meekehleh isn't trying to simplify Valentino or abruptly modernize its heritage. Instead, he dives into the house archives with almost obsessive passion and transforms them into something entirely new. The staging immediately reinforces that feeling. A room immersed in darkness, tiered seating focusing every gaze forward, and a soundtrack blending chamber choir harmonies with electronic textures. There's something theatrical, almost ceremonial about it. Personally, I felt like I was watching not only a runway show but a performance. As if Meekehleh wanted to remind us that haute couture is not simply clothing, it's an experience. And once the first silhouettes appear, that idea becomes even stronger. We discover an incredibly rich visual language where references that should almost clash somehow coexist naturally. Volumes inspired by 18th century pannier skirts, details recalling the Roaring Twenties, dramatic constructions, and at times even echoes of armor and historical costume. What fascinates me is that none of it feels like costume design. Everything has been reinterpreted to exist in the present. As you observe the silhouettes more closely, you also realize how extraordinary the work of the Valentino atelier truly is. Some garments appear almost simple at first glance, until you begin noticing the fabrics, the proportions, the finishing. One black velvet and taffeta gown required nearly 860 hours of craftsmanship. Just thinking about that is dizzying in itself. And it never feels technical for the sake of being technical. Every hour seems to serve emotion. One aspect I especially loved is the way Meekehleh allows garments to occupy and transform space. He often speaks about clothing as something capable of deeply transforming the person who wears it. And you can genuinely feel that here. These silhouettes are not simply dressing the body, they alter presence itself. Some gowns expand outward as if physically reshaping the space surrounding the wearer. There are also subtle tributes to Valentino Garavani throughout the collection. An ivory lace and chiffon column gown appears almost like a quiet apparition within all this visual intensity. Then comes that spectacular red look, exaggerated, dramatic, unapologetic, which reminds us that certain signatures remain timeless regardless of the era. What also struck me was the contrast between the exuberance of the garments and the restraint of the faces. Makeup remains minimal, hair stays simple, almost calm. The models walk with quiet confidence, as though all expression is meant to come directly from the clothing itself. And the further the show progresses, the more the collection seems to accelerate. Volumes expand, textures multiply, references overlap without fully resolving. At times I even had the impression Meekehleh was deliberately inviting us to get lost, not in a negative way, but as an invitation to accept that in haute couture, not everything needs to be immediately understood. Then comes the spectacular finale. Wind machines activate, strobes flood the room, and suddenly the soundtrack takes on a nearly cinematic intensity with Prokofiev's Dance of the Nights. The silhouettes seem propelled onto the stage. It's excessive, yes, but that's precisely what makes the moment unforgettable. Of course, there's also an interesting question to ask. Could this constant richness of references, this visual density and accumulation of ideas, sometimes overshadow the purity that many people traditionally associate with Valentino? Possibly. Some viewers may prefer a more refined and restrained interpretation. But personally, I think Alessandro Meekehleh achieves something incredibly difficult here, making haute couture feel alive without turning it into nostalgia. He doesn't treat heritage as a relic, he treats it as raw material for building a new narrative. For a first gesture at Valentino, I find the result remarkably ambitious and above all deeply coherent with his creative universe. What did you think of Vertigineux? Does this abundance of references speak to you, or do you prefer a more minimal and restrained Valentino? Give me your rating out of 10 and tell me which silhouette stood out the most to you. Thank you for sharing this fashion moment with me. I wish you an excellent time watching the rest of the show. Take care of yourselves, stay curious, and I'll see you very soon for our next fashion journey.